If you live anywhere near an agricultural area, then you've seen hundreds, probably thousands, of these structures behind me, silos. But what is a silo other than a big, hollow, empty tube? And what makes them so interesting? Is it their size, their almost statuesque appearance? Is it that from an early age, you've just been fascinated by tubes? Is it the simple sound of the word, silo, 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 sending a seamless supply of silly smiles sliding from the sides of your face? Or is it just that these things are literally everywhere? Whatever the cause of your wonder, it's deserved. These massive towers that are dashed across the American landscape are part of an easily missed, unobserved supply chain. A supply chain that connects every part of the earth together. These massive tubes aren't just storage for grains of corn. They're the entryway into a massive, vast network of commerce, a network that allows this grain of corn to be sent seamlessly from here in Nebraska to anywhere on the planet. How is such a thing like this possible? I've decided to find out. When you got a question about how the universe works, it sure helps to have a bunch of camera equipment, film crew. You can just throw into the back of your car. Head out into the world with and explore. You know, for science. I'm on my way down to Superior, Nebraska, where I'm going to be talking to Nate Johnson of the Aurora Co-op about the Aurora Co-op grain elevator. And let me tell you, this is a great drive if you want to count silos. These are mostly the smaller silos that almost every farmer or even town uses to store grain as it's being harvested or just to feed livestock. I lost count after the first 100 or so, but this sure beats counting cows. Before we get too far, we should take a moment to talk about what silos actually are and how they came to be so popular across the landscape of America. The term silo comes from the Greek syros, or pit for holding grain. The Greeks were using them in the 8th century BCE, and silos were in use as far back as the 5th millennium BCE. Ancient agricultural cultures quickly discovered the benefits of having a reliable, long-term method to store materials, mostly food. Of course, a silo could be used to keep any sort of bulk material: feed, sawdust, wood chips, coal, you name it. The earliest silos were pit silos, dug into the ground. These remain as one of the 4 main types of silos still in use today. Silo bags, which are essentially heavy plastic tubes packed by machine and sealed at both ends. Bunker or pit silos, trenches built into the ground, usually with concrete and sealed from the top. Silage piles, which are, you guessed it, piles of grain that are surrounded with weatherproofing material. And the good old tower silo, a cylindrical structure that can be made of a variety of materials. It can be a little confusing, but for most people, a tower silo is probably what you think of when you think of the word silo. Tower silos have the benefit of using less space, packing and unpacking easily, and having less storage loss compared to other types of silo. They're also usually made of durable, long-lasting materials like concrete or steel, though you will see plenty of older ones made with wood or other materials. You'll often see older wood silos falling apart but still standing next to newer ones. This is because it makes more sense to simply build the new structure nearby and let time and weather do their thing in tearing down the old one. There's an entire field of photography dedicated to these relics. The use of silos is timeless, but according to records, the above-ground, upright feed silo that we recognize today made its first appearance in America in 1873. A dairy farmer, Fred L. Hatch, found that his silo design allowed for drier and less frozen corn as opposed to the more traditional pit silo, leading to a healthier feed for his cows and a marked increase in milk production. Now, you might not realize it, but I'm not just a silo aficionado and an itinerant video maker, but I'm also a lawyer. And one of my favorite legal cases actually deals with silos. The Supreme Court's 1876 decision in Munn v. Illinois. Munn and Scott operated a grain warehouse and elevator in Chicago. We'll see more about elevators soon enough. They're basically like silos that are used to elevate grain so that it can be loaded into rail cars or boats. Anyhow, Illinois had passed a law that set the maximum prices that warehouses and elevators could charge for handling grain. Munn thought that this was unconstitutional, that the government didn't have any right to tell him how he should operate his private business out of his private property. And he kind of had a point. If farmers and grain dealers are willing to pay the price that Munn wants to charge, what business does the state have in telling them that they're all wrong? Well, the state of Illinois didn't see things this way. They thought that they did have business regulating the prices charged in important industries, and they sued him. The case made it all the way to the Supreme Court. The hard issue that the court had to figure out was under what circumstances, if any, could the state regulate this sort of private activity? The court came up with an answer that, to this day, is the stuff of lawyers' nightmares. It said that the state can regulate industries that are, and I quote, affected with the public interest. That is, the court told us that the state can regulate stuff if it's really important, but it didn't really tell us how to tell when an industry is that important. This led to over 40 years of litigation and confusion that still haunts the law today. The one thing that we do know for certain from this case is that the Supreme Court upheld the Illinois law, which means that the Supreme Court literally told us that grain storage is a really important business. What followed the introduction of the modern silo was a sort of boom in silo construction. The United States Department of Agriculture says that in 1882, there were about 91 silos in the country. That number rose to more than 50,000 by 1895, with an estimated 300,000 to 500,000 silos by 1903. Excellent for individual farms, modern silos are now part of a vast supply chain. Storage facilities like the one we're visiting today act as a sort of grain bank for farmers. Growers from all over the area can come and deposit their grain on its way to market, or just for safekeeping, just like you and I might deposit money in a bank. Wheat, corn, soybeans, cotton, these elevators can be built to collect, store, and ship just about anything. And buyers can be from just about anywhere. Thanks to this infrastructure, a single piece of corn grown in a field in Nebraska can travel by road, rail, and port to nearly anywhere in the world, whether it's headed to be used as feed for livestock or turned into some other product or sold directly to a consumer. Even before you see the inside, the operation is impressive. It's massive. From a distance, the place seems almost like a fortress. It even has its own moat in a sense, a private railroad track running in a circle around it. From the outside, it might not seem too busy around here. Occasionally, a truck turns onto the dirt road and disappears around the bend under a bridge. Occasionally, a truck comes back down that road and heads back out onto the highway. But if you know where to look, or when, you begin to notice the carefully choreographed flurries of activity. Amidst the several buildings and silos are towers for the elevator to move the grain, with stair structures and scaffolding for crews to move up and down the structure's exteriors. Under the ground is a massive tunnel, connecting the pits into which grain entering the facility is dumped to the elevator system that lifts the grain hundreds of feet into the air for storage, literally moving acres worth of corn or soybeans every minute. Like most operations of this type, the elevator here is right on the railroad. A sort of overhang above the tracks allows rail cars to come into cover to be filled with grain. A bright yellow rail above allows crew members to put on a harness and traverse the top of the train for inspections, which, I can't lie, looks like a lot of fun. Most of the time, things are quiet around here, other than the steady stream of semi-trucks showing up every few minutes or so, hauling corn from surrounding farms. But when a train comes in, things get busy. When a load of grain arrives at the elevator, the first thing that happens is an inspection of the material. Obviously, that means paperwork, but more important is siphoning off some of the grain. This sample travels by pneumatic tube into the office where it's given a complete physical. The stuff is weighed and tested for moisture levels. It's also sifted through to find any FM. Don't get excited, radio fans, that's just foreign material to the layman. Things like dirt, twigs, and some unmentionables. Anything that isn't grain. All of this data is used to give the grain a rating. Once they have an idea of what that rating is, they know where to store it in the elevator. Following that initial inspection and weighing, trucks move inside the facility to dump their supply. And when I say dump, that's literally what happens. It's raining grain, hallelujah. But what looks like a bowl of cereal for giants is quickly swept into grates on the floor and into a massive system of conveyor belts. Those belts carry the grain to hoppers in the central part of the elevator that either lifts the grain up to the very top of the silo for deposit or pushes it out into the pit silo on the ground. For the grain going up, its transport is a series of buckets on an ever-rotating treadmill. When it's time to ship the grain out, it's usually by train. That's where that overhang and our old friends in harnesses do their moonwalk atop the locomotive. One crew member opens up the hatch and inspects the empty car to make sure it's clean and ready. As the cars move through, a tube spills grain from the silo down the elevator and into the car, and on the other side, it's inspected again and closed up tight. Then, the grain is on its way. This isn't magic. It isn't rocket science either, but it is a tremendously large, fully automated mechanical system with a baffling number of moving parts requiring monitoring, maintenance, and a whole heck of a lot of power. That monitoring takes place in the office behind me. At the console there, the operations manager can see every aspect of the automation, from where the grain is coming in from, where it's going, and every step along the way. Sensors check the heat and power consumption of each piece of equipment. Not only does this help them keep tabs on safety, overheating equals combustion equals danger, but knowing the current being drawn by any one piece of equipment can tell them how hard it's working, which means keeping tabs on weight and speed as well. And all of this data across all these moving parts is available to them in real time. Agriculture is a community. And what does every community need? I mean, besides education, infrastructure, safety, stable coexistence with the surrounding natural environment, and health resources, almost all of which agriculture possesses off the bat, it needs a bank. Farmers produce crops with almost limitless possibilities. Corn, soy, wheat, cotton, they aren't just useful on their own, but are the core components of most of the items that you use or consume every day, and that means that everybody needs some. Producing and storing grain are just two steps in its long journey. Sooner or later, it's got to get to market, and this is where a crew like Ross's come in. They're the middlemen who find buyers for grain. The day that we visited, we had the opportunity to see a train get loaded up with corn that was on its way to Mexico. That corn had been owned by all the farmers out in the fields who had brought their grain to the elevator to deposit. In turn, the elevator sold this grain in exchange for good old-fashioned, spendable money. That money then goes out to the farmers, with the elevator taking a cut for its own operations, and the deal is complete. In the simplest sense, that's what these massive silos are. Community banks, where farmers are able to store their grain, and they're also brokers that help the farmers sell their product out into the market. It can't always be so clear-cut, of course. Like Ross pointed out, this is a market like any other, and the value of these commodities is subject to a myriad of possibilities. You know the list: scarcity, delays, tariffs, treaties, just plain human error. That's why the market makers at the elevator never stop crunching numbers, comparing prices, and staying in constant communication with their producers and prospective buyers. And just like a bank, a producer is always welcome to withdraw their grain anytime they'd like. Maybe a farmer found what sounds like a better price for their corn down the road, or maybe just going straight to the consumer. No problem. The elevator will return the farmer's grain and subtract that from the total they have available to sell. As to what those prices actually are, well, that's up to our old pal, the free market. Just a day ago, I would have looked at the silo behind me and thought, that's where the grain lives. But no, that's where the grain's life is just starting to get interesting. The sheer scope of the supply chain that these silos mark the start of is really hard to comprehend. Earlier, we saw a train loading up with corn on its way to Mexico. But in reality, that corn could have been going anywhere in the world. Maybe it's feed for livestock, or in a factory being turned into flour, ethanol in Brazil, fireworks in India, antibiotics, syrup, bookbinding glue. Or maybe it's in my pocket, a corn chip that we like to eat. The scope of the system is massive. When you take a step back, the picture that you can see connects growers in the most remote parts of the globe to producers and consumers and goods and services in every nation on Earth. A vast interconnected web of commerce, of goods getting created, they're turned into intermediate products and final products that consumers ultimately buy and use. It seems simple enough. It's just a grain of corn in a silo. But once you start to see the whole system, it can boggle the mind. But If you zoom out, the picture that you get is of a tower in a field in the middle of everywhere.